Daisy.
And I'm Terry.
And this is the Monday Mindset Podcast,
where we share things of interest to us and hopefully to you.
So let's get started with episode number 249. And this week it is Terry's turn to share something. Terry, what do you have?
Well, Daisy, as I have been doing a little more often, I am branching out and finding new things to listen to.
Excellent.
And I found this one, I think partly because it's a topic that I've been interested in, but I've not really looked at. It is a podcast called The Messy Podcast.
Sounds like it would be very fitting for me.
Yeah, not that kind of messy. I'm trying to see, I don't even know much about the actual podcast, but it appears to me, in my lack of deep dive on this, I think they're only in season 2, but in each episode, they're talking about a particular theory based on a book. And it's a book that I have not read yet. So I thought, well, let me listen to some people talking about it and how they're applying it or thinking about it. And it goes back to an author and speaker that you and I have talked about a couple of times before, I think, Mel Robbins.
Oh, she's got a new book out, hasn't she?
Yeah. So if you recall, she is the one who has the 5-second rule. If listeners haven't heard of her or haven't gone to that episode of ours before, she was at a place in her life where she was really at a low. Career was crashing. Husband's business was crashing. Based on all of this, her finances were really in bad shape. She was $800,000 in debt, losing her job, husband losing his business. And, won't be surprising to some people when they hear that. Think she was having a hard time getting up and feeling motivated to do things because everything just felt so overwhelming and everything. So this is when she really started her 5-second rule theory. And that is that you count backwards 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and then you just do it. Now, in this example, it was she just got out of bed, but it applies to lots of things. And it's really about getting out of our own way, preventing the overthinking that we tend to do when we need to do something that we're resisting for whatever reason. In the first episode of this podcast, the Messy Podcast, they kind of go through her background. So I had that refreshed for me. And they talked about the 5-second rule and how useful that was. But I guess in continuing to teach about this and speak about it, Mel Robbins really started to focus on another aspect, and that it's not only kind of jump-starting ourselves to do something, but it's also to kind of think about what can we do? How can we create our reality and our future? And what are some of the things getting in the way? And one of the big barriers was in relation to other people. And in many ways, I think a big theme here is kind of wanting to control other people, almost scripting things for them, wanting them to do this way. And if they do this way, then you can do this. And so she really developed this theory of, she calls it the let them theory.
That's right. I was trying to remember.
Trying to remember what the book was. So basically, let them. Stop trying to control the people around you. When you let them be who they are, you gain control over your own emotional peace and improve your relationship. And this is what she calls the let them theory. Let them be themselves. Let them do what they're going to do. Let them say what they're going to say. I can't control that. I can't control the situation, but I can control how I respond to it, how I manage my emotional reactions to it. In it, she talks about an important part of this of emotional adulthood, meaning you be in charge of your own emotions, not waiting for other people to be in charge of them, to change them for you, to make them feel better, that you are really your emotional management system. And then, I think of the flip side of that is, don't you try to control other people's emotions. Many of us spend a lot of time doing things more driven by how we think someone else will feel and what impact it will have. And sacrifice ourselves. And so when I think of the let them mentality, I also think let them manage their emotions. I can't tiptoe. I can't carefully, precisely do each thing, hoping I don't cause certain emotions for them. So let them be who they are. Let them say what they say. And then throughout I did listen to a few episodes. So it's going to make me giving you the notes for this episode a little more challenging. But in letting them be who they are and say what they're going to say, it also then entails having boundaries. So it's not just, well, let them do horrible things and just tolerate it. You still get to have boundaries, and you should. And it's important to have boundaries. That helps people to know what you are willing to allow and what you are not willing to allow in relation with them. I've been hearing other people referencing this in little ways, just like, well, let them. One of the episodes is about comparisons and that we get wrapped up in comparing ourselves to others. And they share an example from social media where someone posts, oh my gosh, I got to have this amazing experience. Let's say it's a cruise and I bought all these wonderful things. And you're their best friend and you didn't get invited. And so many of us, our natural response would be, well, what's wrong with me? How come I didn't get invited? How come I didn't get to do that? And to be able to say, let them have that experience. Let them have those things or whatever. That doesn't take something away or mean something about you.
Mm-hmm.
And really what it does is it frees us all up to have more connection in relationships. If we're not trying to manage our relationships by, I'll get them to say what I want them to say or think what I want them to think or do what I want them to do, I will let them. I'll let them be them. And I'll manage me and my responses to it. Now, a future episode that I listened to, I think was in season 2 of this podcast, they talked about let them. They were saying it plus, I was reading it and, but let them and let me. And the let me part is, what role do I play in creating my life that I want? So it's not only not controlling others, it's then also taking responsibility for how I want to create my experiences, how I want to manage my relationships, how I want to manage my emotions. So it's not just let them and have them be out there, but also, and let me. So that's the part where we get to take action and take responsibility. Not take responsibility for changing others, but take responsibility for how we want to move forward in our lives toward our goals, how we want to navigate our relationships. And so I thought it was a nice, just this idea of working on letting go of the need to control and working on managing ourselves, taking the responsibility for the things we want to be creating. And one of the things she suggests in the book that they covered in these episodes is that it might be really helpful to look at, why is it that I've been trying to control? I think sometimes when I try to control, I just joked with a friend recently about this. I said, something you need to know, it's kind of a new friend, something you need to know about me is I pretty much think I know everything, and I think I know how everyone should be doing everything. So you'll hear that in my stories or whatnot. And she kind of laughed, but why is that? Why is it that I think I need to tell everyone how to do everything? So Mel Robbins kind of encourages, start to explore why you have this desire to control others. For some of us, it feels safer. If I can predict how it's going to go, and if I can make sure no one's upset and everyone's feelings are okay, I'm safer.
Yeah, you feel like you have less anxiety about something.
Mm-hmm.
If a friend or relative tends to react certain ways, so you sort of plan a visit where you manage that to not trigger certain things so that you don't get anxious, but it all gets very messy. Apt.
Absolutely. And I think you just highlighted it in an important way. I think if we're really working on this theory and applying it, they're going to say triggering things. Because I'm going to let them. I'm going to let them be them. What I'm going to focus on is, how do I not have the same reaction? How do I not hear it as an affront to me? How do I not get pissy about it? Because when I do, I shut down. And that creates distance in relationships for me. So how can I not expect them to change in order for me to do it differently? How can I work on a different response, even though they're doing the triggering behavior or saying the triggering thing?
Yeah, it's tricky, isn't it? Because if you're thinking, well, yeah, if you let them, but what if you're letting them continue to speak negatively about somebody? Or, I know I'm purposefully thinking of negative things about this, but yeah, I know you mentioned earlier, that's where it becomes important about setting your boundaries, how you react, where your limits are, I guess, so you let them have their behavior, but there might be a consequence of that you leave the room or whatever. I don't know, I'm talking off the top of my head. But I think that's where it gets really complicated and difficult, when we get into setting those boundaries for letting me have my behavior. That's where it starts to get really difficult if you're not good at speaking up for yourself or setting those boundaries. Or I don't know if I'm making much sense here, if I'm taking her theory and twisting it in a way it's not meant.
No, I think that's, as with any of these type of theories, it is complicated in real life and in some real examples. I'm trying to think of some that I've experienced where, let's pull from, I won't say any real specifics, but things that we have talked about over the past couple of years here about anti-racism, or you just mentioned in last week's episode, a previous episode you had done about everyday sexism and things. So if every time I encounter something that is racist or sexist, if I blow up or shut down and go into my shell, that's not working well for me. But in my way of understanding this theory, it's really, I'm going to let that person who is expressing racist statements be who they are. But I definitely will make decisions about how much I engage with them, how I engage with them, when I walk away, like you just mentioned, whether I ever engage again. And I totally get it. And I appreciate that some people are more confrontational than that. But for me, fighting back every time I hear something that is harmful to the way I believe things should be working, that comes at too high of a price. So I'm going to let them. But I'm not going to let them keep doing it around me. I'm going to distance myself from them.
Yeah, I see the distinction. And I like what you said about, I'm going to let them be who they are, but I'm not necessarily going to let them voice that opinion, whether that be because I'm just going to remove myself from the situation so I can't hear them, or whether I'm going to go home and look into ways that I could address that in the moment. In the future, I'll remove myself this time because I'm not sure what the best thing is to do. But I might go and find out how I might be able to do that is in a non-confrontational way, and maybe, just maybe, it might change the way that they think, and it might get them to think a bit more about what they're saying. Who knows? But yes, there are other options, but I'm not going to, I'm going to let them be who they are. And I'm desperately trying to remember the book, and I did mention it on the podcast. I think it was How to Be a Good Ally, or I could be wrong in that. And I must reread it or re-listen to it, because it was one of those ones where she did sort of set you things to go and think about, and sort of almost some sort of workbook things to go away and think about and work through. And I just wanted to sort of just listen through to it, let it wash over. And then, as soon as I got to the end, I thought it was going to be important to listen to again. So that's just reminded me to go and listen to it again. But she did have some practical how-tos, some practical ways to actually address those in the moment, if you felt that you could. So there could be ways of changing that in the future, changing how you react to something.
And I think another piece for me as I was listening to you, when I think of the let them and let me, the let them is I'm going to let them be who they are. I'm going to let me feel empowered enough to do what I need to do with this, whether that is, like we've been saying, end the conversation, hang up the phone, walk away, move my desk to a different area if it's an office situation. Like, what am I going to do for me? Being responsible for me, being responsible for my emotions. I think where, and having not looked into it in enough detail, I think where this theory may really break down for me is if what others are doing is abusive and an over use of power against others or me. So it's one thing for me as a white person to say, well, if someone's saying racist things or posting racist things on Facebook, here's how I might do that. I'll let them, but I'll also let me. That breaks down some when I start thinking about physical harm, verbal abuse, all kinds of things, violence. And I don't know how much she gets into any of that in the book, but I do know that part of what they discuss in this podcast is she is not saying, oh, just tough it up, get a thick skin and let people do bad things. It's not that. And I think especially this book for me, or the way these two were talking about the book, the way I try and think of it, is more in my little bit closer personal relationships, friendships, romantic relationship, work relationships. I know that I get in the way in my relationships when I'm trying to control it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't worry quite as much about that with someone I occasionally have interaction with. I can work on that another time. But the people who are close to me in my life are not doing physically harmful or threatening things in my experience with them. But how can I continue to work on let them be them? They're going to do things differently. They're going to value things differently than I do. They're going to want to do different activities than I want to do. How can I keep working on let them and let me? Because the other thing, and they didn't talk about it in the episodes I was listening to, but I think one way that I know I have struggled with this concept in a way, and other people might relate to this, is I was so focused in the past of trying to just let them that I gave up me. Oh, let's do this. And even though I didn't want to, I wanted to keep the peace. I wanted to spend time. And so I'd say, okay, I sacrificed too much of the me part of the equation.
Yeah.
And that's something I think I've worked on, but I want to keep working on. Letting go of trying to control them, focus on me and what I need, but also not minimizing me in order to let them.
Yeah, it is tricky. It is tricky when, we can all think of problematic relationships and relationships where you're thrown together with somebody, or you're having to manage a family and a household where you can't just completely just let them be them, but yeah, let me be me, and we have to set some boundaries, have to find a way of doing it. But I guess it's maybe finding a way of doing it where you still let them be them, but letting me be me and letting the household run as it should do. I don't know. I can always think of ways that it's problematic and think of difficulties in the theory. But yeah, I can certainly see kind of where she's heading. And as you say, it doesn't necessarily apply to every situation anyway.
I also think in listening and thinking about it, it sounds like in some ways it would take less energy. I think the more I try to be controlling and, trying to get the response I want to get or whatnot, gosh, that takes so much like mental manipulation versus let them. They're going to do it their way. They're going to say it their way. They're going to come at you with it this way. Now, how do you want to respond? And I don't mean in a combative way, but I really like the piece about emotional adulthood. in that I want to be responsible for my emotions. I don't want to rely on other people being responsible for my emotions. I hope they're responsible to my emotions, like they're not intentionally wanting to make me feel bad or create discomfort. But them being them or saying things how they need to say it sometimes may be hurtful to me. And I need to continue to be adult-like in how I hear that.
Yeah, it's a good differentiation there that, yeah, you're not reliant on somebody else's behavior for how you feel.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, it certainly makes me want to go and listen a bit more to what she has to say about it. And yeah, maybe listen to the book and all the different ways she explores it. Because she must explore it in quite a few different ways if there's a whole book to listen to.
I also thought this was the fun part about listening to this. It's almost like these people doing the Messy podcast. It's like Daisy and Terry talking about some other book. Like we talked about Brene Brown's book for weeks. And, you know, part of that was us reporting what we read. But certainly we reported it through how we understood it. And we use our examples and things. And so it was just kind of fun to listen to two people's take. Mel Robbins was not in this podcast. And so listening to them talk about what she said.
Right.
And I thought, oh my gosh, this is like Terry and Daisy talking about how Jim Quick talks with so-and-so, or, you know. So it was a fun thing to listen to. And the episodes are pretty short. I just had my earbuds in and was just kind of listening. So I ended up listening to, I think, 3 or 4 different episodes. So I thought, yeah, this might be a concept worth implementing in my life more so than I had been aware. Like, I'm going to work on let them and let me.
Yeah, because it is interesting hearing other people's take on somebody else's theory. And I can't remember, I'm sure it was Mel Robbins. Was it was the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, or it was something else? But
she also does the high five.
Oh, it was the high five. That's it. It was the high five in the mirror. And we added something on. I can't remember what it was, but we added something on. I always think it's interesting because you hear the author's take on something, obviously how they came up with their theory or their idea, or whatever it is they're writing about and they're talking about. But then, of course, once they've released it out there into the wild, we take that and we digest it and we use it in our own lives, and it takes on a life of its own, and it takes on a different perspective, and it gets skewed according to your environment and your perspective and your experiences, which I always think is interesting, because we were talking earlier before we started recording how different people react to different things in different ways. And that's always what's interesting, isn't it? I think, anyway, hearing other people's experiences and other people's thoughts on something. That's what triggered me to look more into what we were talking about, was listening to somebody else talk about it. And that's a really interesting perspective. And that has directly resonated with things that concern me. I must look into this a bit more. So, yeah, that sounds like an interesting podcast, and I like the name. I shall have to go and check it out.
Very good. The Messy Podcast.
Yeah, good name. Well, I like this. This has been very good from you, coming up with all these new podcasts to go and listen to.
Very good.
Okay, well, until I see you next time with another new podcast, I hope you have a very wonderful week.
Take good care, everyone.